you.
Thank you very much, and there may be questions afterwards. Welcome. Second.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Ed Worley with the National Rifle Association. I want to thank the Speaker's staff for having lots of conversations with us, because we have had lots of conversations. The one thing we can agree upon is that the poaching of elephants is a deplorable activity that takes place. But the challenges with this bill is, as we've discussed with the Speaker's staff, are coming to technical issues when it deals with firearms. There are many firearms that are very collectible, very antique, very historic firearms that have ivory parts on them, ivory sights, ivory grips, ivory inlays, and things like that. Part of the challenge in the bill is it talks about documentation, but it doesn't define what documentation is. It doesn't define what it leaves open is, what we're stepping into is, you're going to start having the Department of Fish and Wildlife become gun regulators. So if I want to sell an antique firearm or I want to pass on an antique firearm that has ivory inlays in it, I'm going to have to document where the ivory came from. As I've talked to the Speaker's staff about, you may have a gun that's 100 years old, but the ivory inlays were done in the 50s with lawfully acquired ivory that was brought in by the State Department records and everything else, ivory that can be used, can be done. But then the person, when they go to transfer the firearm that they inherited from their great-grandfather, they will have no ability at all to document where the ivory came from. So they are left in limbo, because now you're going to throw this to the Department of Fish and Wildlife to decide what documentation is. So here we are just debating whether you're going to put people in criminal activity, people from transferring lawfully owned family heirlooms and collectible firearms. So the question is that if you go to the Department of Fish and Wildlife, how are they going to define what the documentation is? So part of the challenge in the bill is that what do you do with lawfully acquired ivory that's here already? Part of the challenge is it says if an ivory item is more than 5%. So if I go to take an antique shotgun to be repaired, the ivory bead or the ivory sights are 100% ivory, but they may be very, very small. So I could not even buy replacement ivory sights for an antique shotgun that I'm trying to restore. The other challenge comes up when you have family estates. So a grandfather passes away. The estate has to go to an estate auction. The trustees have no choice. They must sell the family estate. Now the challenge is they cannot document what happened. They don't know where the great-grandfather got the stuff from. They don't know that he took a hunting trip in the 1940s. They don't know where he got the ivory inlays in his shotgun or anything else. So now the problem you have is now you have estates who can't lawfully transfer family estate products that they must transfer. The family cannot intervene. The family cannot do anything because the family has no legal authority to intervene in the estate transaction. So we all agree that poaching of ivory is a bad thing. I think the challenge with any legislation we see here at the Capitol is the technical nuances and the things that happen. The thing I've seen over the years is when the legislature throws things to the bureaucracy and just says, okay, we're going to do this, you figure out how to do it. We're all going to be discussing this for years, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife is not capable of regulating guns or the ivory on the guns. So for those many reasons, we oppose the bill, but we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you very much.
I can tell your experience at doing this because it was 3 minutes and 3 seconds and without notes. Perfect.
Right. Thank you, Ms.
Yes, yeah. And before you go, if you would sit down, I would like to see if there's questions for any of these 4 people, and then we'll open it up for audience to just add on 4 and then against with just their name and affiliation. But since we have these 4 here, I think this is a good time to ask questions. Senator Allen.
Okay, so I thought when you mentioned transfer, you know, gifting and inheritance seem to be fine under this bill. I do think your point about the estates is very well taken. I'd like to ask the author, because you're absolutely right. There are times when an estate sale requires the liquidation of an estate through sale. And what happens in that incidence within the state of California when there's would they have to sell the property outside of the state? Is that the idea? They have to leave the state to sell it? Yeah.
What I would say is, in terms of that particular issue, we've looked at it. You know, in this case, it's not the first time an estate includes a banned item. We already have issues that exist. Hunting trophies, stuffed ducks, some of those things can't be sold either in the open market. These types of items can go to museums, can go to institutions, they can be inherited and given to relatives. There's no thing that precludes that from happening. The bill is silent on that. Silence equals approval. So there is existing precedent for how to deal with items in which, you would have the ivory. So.
But there are some cases in which someone dies without an heir, or where there is a disagreement over the dissolution of the estate. It can sometimes get very intense, and the only solution is to sell just to liquidate the entire estate, and then you can divvy up the money generated from the estate sale to the heirs. That happens sometimes in trust and estates law.
And there's federal law. I mean, there is federal law that addresses some of these issues as well, if you want to add.
Yes, if I could just add, there are a lot of restrictions on the commercialization of wildlife parks that exist already. I could come up with a litany of examples of maybe bear parts that were in an estate. They, in theory, have value, but they only have value in the context of a lawful market. And these are products that are rapidly, in some cases under federal law, very restricted. You can't import any ivory into the country as it is right now lawfully. So again, the existence of some of these items in an estate, it's not unheard of that there would be things in an estate that are not lawful for sale. And the notion of value becomes somewhat convoluted in that circumstance because there's really only black market illegal value at that point.
No, because you could cross the border and sell it.
You actually would face a lot of limitations. They were discussing documentation, for example. You're required to have proper documentation under federal law to do an interstate sale of this product.
Right. So all I'm saying is, okay, you've got an estate. Someone dies. They have ivory products in the estate. There is a disagreement in the divvying up of the estate assets amongst the heirs. The conservator, executor, has proceeded with an estate sale. This is very common in these situations where they're basically required to sell the entire estate and then divvy up the money generated from the sale. What happens when there is a piece of ivory that's part of the estate that is being sold?
Well, and I presume you mean something not otherwise exempted under the bill. So an ivory item that isn't more than 100 years old, it includes less than 5%, nor is a musical instrument that meets the terms of it. I would not, as I sit here, I don't know the exact legal precedent, but there are certainly lots and lots of items that exist in people's personal estates that have for other reasons been forbidden from commercialization that would not be lawful for sale. And as I sit here, I'm not confident what the legal execution for eliminating those things are, but the fundamental purpose of this bill is to eliminate the commercial value of ivory. That's the purpose. So to authorize the commercialization, let's take a second context. Before this person dies, they would not be allowed to have sold it and commercialized it. Why would their death precipitate a legal sale?
Because there is so you're right? So. But there is a process that at times you are required to liquidate an estate. It's trust and estates law as it relates to. Maybe we'd have to add in some language about forcing an heir to decide to take one of these items or something. I don't know. But this is what happens when people pass away and there's disagreement. The estate executor will oftentimes be required to liquidate the estate. It's something that happens. Are you not?
Are those items never donated? Again, if there's no legal commercial market for one of those items, how can it be sold?
I guess I'm trying to find out, are you making a statement or asking a question?
I'm trying to understand what would happen in that case. Would the executor, because apparently you've been discussing this, would the executor then cross the state border to sell the item in an auction outside the state.
Well, then there would be federal rules and regulations already in existence. I mean, you're adding this to a list of things and items that have already fallen under the same categories, so the same process would be relevant.
Right, leopard
And the
skins,
paper-
all kinds of things that, and I just know about wildlife trade. I'm sure there's all kinds of other items that the state of California has seen fit to ban for all kinds of host of public safety and moral reasons. And I can't imagine this isn't an unsettled question, but it's something that wouldn't be unique to this circumstance.
Is there though?
Senator,
So if I, may allow, if do you have another question on this topic to any of the speakers? And then we have some other members who have questions.
I maybe would like to let her answer, but I guess I support the bill, and I think I support its goals. I do think that this is an ambiguity that I, with all due respect, don't think has been addressed. But I'd love to hear your response.
I would agree, and that's why, we can go around in a circle about this, but that's why we suggested prospective for the paperwork component, so that the public that currently possesses, they're not the poachers, they're not the current poaching trade. If you look, for example, on the Antique Roadshow, they have a website dedicated just to the ivory sale, and they have protocols and everything. And I think part of the problem that we're going to get into here in California is we're going to mix this up with the federal law and create a lot of confusion for people. So that's why we recommend this be prospective.
I guess I would just ask the author to just, maybe they've already done this, but connect with some people from the Trust and Estates Bar to just make sure that that coming out of this, you're able to at least have a vision for a workable solution to this kind of incident. I'm sure it's not particularly frequent, but it will happen from time to time. There are complicated rules associated with the liquidation of estates, and oftentimes requirements that are placed on the executor that are pretty aggressive under current trust and estates law.
I'm happy to do that. I would think that given existing federal law, the existing paperwork that is required, the existing examples that follow suit, but I'm happy to do that and get that information to you, Senator.
Thank you for that. You're dealing with a Bolt Law School graduate that probably took some good classes along the way, right? Senator Jackson and then Senator Hueso, did you have your hand?
I just wanted to try to clarify,
Senator Stone.
because this is a law school professor, and as a recovering lawyer myself, you'll have to
This committee is loaded with them.
You'll have to forgive him. But what I hear you saying is that there are already procedures in place for the liquidation under these circumstances, under estate sale or mandated liquidation of estates, et cetera, that address other areas where there are prohibitions as well. Is that basically, whether it's federal or state, are those already in place?
Yes.
Okay.
As I understand it, yes.
But
I
you'll
will do the
clarify.
additional due diligence, not being an attorney. I will
It's
check
okay.
with a few others.
It's okay, not being an attorney. And then the other thing I wanted to ask as far as this goes is, and as a scrimshaw owner, I come from New England and have family from New Bedford, where scrimshaw was a gift that we used to get as children, but it was usually on old whales, when we had whales, before we almost moved them into extinction. So I appreciate from both perspectives, but I also appreciate on behalf of my favorite writer, Dr. Seuss, that we need more Hortons. Horton hears a who and Horton hatches an egg, which talk about, frankly, what I think, and we have experts here, are some of the extraordinary qualities that elephants have, things that we as human beings would probably do well to try to emulate rather than force into extinction. And I want to thank you for bringing this bill. As we listen to some of the concerns about private property rights and so forth and so on, I just think of the arrogance of man, thinking that we should be able to decide what species live and
No.
don't. And so I understand there might be some concerns, and I suspect they're being addressed and will continue to be addressed, this being one of them. But in terms of prospective, and this was the question, it's my understanding that it's very difficult to determine what's old ivory and what's, I mean, I know mine is old because I got it when I was 5 and 10 years old, and I'm old. And so I know it was old when I got it. So for others, that's my understanding. I don't think anyone's trying to undermine anyone's livelihood, but there are times where we really have to prioritize. And so I thank you for your work, and I think that it's nice to have people who are coming in support of a position that you support. You know, it's, I think, very important that we address this issue. So I thank you for your.
Senator Hueso.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just also wanted to chime in, just some comments of support for the bill. I just wanted to thank the author for bringing it forward. It's very sad to read about the extinction of species. Every year we hear of some species leaving the earth forever, never to come back. And I think we've been horrible stewards of our earth. We can do a lot better. I think this bill doesn't necessarily solve every problem, but it goes a long way. And I think it's absolutely necessary. I think, you know, when you have to make a decision whether you're going to, you know, save a species or, you know, purchase a product that can operate or that can exist without that ingredient, it's an easy decision to make. This is not a difficult decision, but it's sad to me that we haven't done more. So I applaud your efforts. I'm a huge fan of the rhino itself, and I've kept, you know, tab with the dwindling populations. I'm very sad that it may be possible that in my lifetime we see that species become extinct, and that's not something that we should take lightly. That's not something that we should turn our backs on. We should do more as a community to rally around all these species and allow them to continue to exist. I mean, I want my children to enjoy these species and their children, and maybe even one day I'd like to visit them in their native environment, just to witness the awe of God's creations and what we're doing in not doing enough to protect God's creations is really a sin on us that, you know, we can do more. So thank you very much for doing this. This is a wonderful legacy to.
Sorry. Thank you, Senator Hueso, for your comments. And Senator Stone, you had some questions, perhaps, or?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to just state unequivocally that I think it's deplorable, the poaching of elephants and rhinoceros that we see occurring in the world. And certainly if California could pass a bill which could become the law, that would forever ensure the existence of these species, I would be the first to sign up. But there are other factors, I think, that are responsible for the decimation of these beautiful animals. One is decreased habitat, especially in war zones that are unstable, especially in Africa. There is no question that Asia is the #1 beneficiary of illegal ivory trade. The United States, I heard, is second. But I've also read and researched that recently the U.S. Customs Service came up with 250 pounds of ivory, which is more ivory than we certainly want to see coming into this country illegally. Now, this bill appropriately goes after ivory that was acquired after June 1st, 1977, as I presume being illegal in this state as for sale. The problem that I have with the bill is how you retrospectively can document when ivory was acquired. Certainly, the law that is being considered today, we wish that we had the foresight prior to 1977 to see the potential devastation that could come by not protecting these animals and their habitat. And we wouldn't be dealing with many of the issues that my friends at the NRA and the hunting advocates are making here today. I believe that the bill could be more supportable by me if either it is prospective, and because there's no way that we're going to bring back those animals whose ivory is on artifacts from the past. What we need to do is protect the importation of ivory and send a statement, which I think this bill does, and I applaud the authors, that we have no tolerance for the further poaching of these precious animals. But if we're going to enact regulations and we're going to empower the Fish and Wildlife to go into gun shops and go into antique dealers and seek fines and actual criminal allegations and criminal prosecutions, I believe, at least at a minimum, the onus of responsibility should be on the state to prove the dating of the ivory and not on the owner of the ivory. I think you're just you're making a witch hunt out there, and so I don't know if the author has had any thoughts about that, about making it prospective, or if you're going to have an enforcement through Fish and Wildlife. Would you be open to making Fish and Wildlife have the responsibility of proving that the ivory that has been obtained was obtained within a legal time frame?
It's a question to the author.
Yes, thank you. You know, part of doing the prospective, when we looked at this law, when California looked at this in 1976, 77, you know, we looked at, you know, as I understand, all of the considerations there, and we then created a big loophole, which is why we're back here today to address some of the issues. I don't want to weaken current law. I think that's partially my concern, which requires the defendant to prove the date. I'm not trying to make it difficult for people. I'm trying to close a loophole that's caused the problem we currently have. I think also in terms of you know, how we proceed forward in terms of enforcement, which was a different question. You know, the enforcement challenges have existed all along, and I don't want to create different enforcement challenges. So it has been difficult, and I've been incredibly open to trying to figure out how to do a number of these things. It is not my desire, certainly, to criminalize collectors, to you know, to do anything that would create difficult treatment, which is why I have been open and willing, and why you hear all these people saying take no further amendments, because we've taken amendments in reaction to Department of Fish and Wildlife on enforcement issues. I will continue to talk with people about how to do this in a way that doesn't create other enforcement problems, but tries to address the issue, which is the illegal trade. If you have ideas, I'm happy to hear them in terms of how to do that. I did offer opposition the same types of treatment in terms of exemption that allows for sale of antique musical instruments containing up to 20%. I really left the ball in their court, and that hasn't come back to give me ideas of how to do it, but we offered that. So, you know, I'm more than open as we move forward. We still have time, but again, I don't want to create another enforcement problem. I don't want to confuse current law, particularly federal law. So we'll have to see where that leads us, Senator, but I'm more than willing to hear options.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate your answers. The only way that one can actually date ivory is through probably carbon dating, you know, to get a definitive date, which we know would be cost prohibitive. But maybe an avenue that, because I'd like to support your bill, because the message that you're sending is a very important one. Maybe there's some type of an ongoing registration process for existing legal ivory existing in California that people can somehow register their artifacts, their weaponry, and that way they're immune from prosecution, if you will, in the life of that object, fomite, if you want to call it a fomite. And then the last thing that I'm concerned about is if this comes down without any amendments to my concerns, that you're going to be creating more scarcity of a product that is unfortunately desired by many, especially in Asian countries. I'm worried that we're going to increase the bounty on further massacres of these beautiful animals, and that's something I certainly don't want to see happen. So I hope that you'll continue to work with the opposition, consider the registry. If you can incorporate that, I would be delighted to support your bill, just to make sure that we're not inappropriately filing criminal charges against people that have lawfully acquired ivory at a time that was used when no one had the foresight to see that these animals could be decimated to the magnitude that they have been, and I appreciate your consideration.
And before we hear from the other opponents who are just going to lend their name and affiliation in opposition, I had failed to do that before opening it up. We'll do that. But let's hear from Senator Vidak on questions of any of these four people primarily, or the author.
To the opposition, Speaker talked about amendments. Can you tell me how the amendments are different, or why you are not liking the amendments that the musical instruments have versus other artifacts?
Well, one of the amendments we've discussed is a 20% exemption. The challenge is how do you define what 20% of a handgun is, or 20% of a rifle is? Is it by volume? Is it by weight? What is it? The challenge is when you're restoring antique firearms, if you're replacing the sights or the beads or whatever you're replacing, the sight that you had manufactured of antique ivory that had been imported in the 40s that you have State Department paperwork for, that part that you manufactured to restore the value of the family heirloom is 100% ivory. So therefore, you cannot transfer the new part you've created to restore the firearm that you have. So the part of the challenge is that's when you get into these weird nuances of how do you figure this stuff out. So part of the challenge when you're working through this is that the other challenge is that you don't know when the firearm was.
When you say you can't transfer, you mean you can't sell?
Right.
Okay.
Well, so I go to an antique firearms restoration expert to have my antique shotgun restored, because part of the ivory which is on there, which is inherently part of the historical value of the firearm, is missing. Currently, I can go there and they can take legacy ivory that's imported, and they have the documentation for it. They can manufacture reproduction parts for that will restore it to its look and to its collectability. The challenge is now the antique firearms dealer and the antique gunsmith, in order for that person to manufacture the part to restore the firearm, the part that they're going to sell me and transfer to me is 100% ivory. So the 20% exemption doesn't work, because the inlays that I'm having restored are 100% ivory. So when you look at the parts, is that you have 20% of the firearm, but the parts I'm acquiring to restore the firearm are 100% ivory. So we're talking about the technicality of the bills. I mean, we've had some very nice discussions with the Speaker staff, and I do appreciate the time they've spent. We've sort of gone around and around in how do you try to do this. Part of the documentation is, as I said, well, just go get the gunsmith to give you a letter saying when the gun was manufactured. Well, if the gun was manufactured in 1905, then it was made collectible in 1955 because the guy took it to Africa to go hunting with. The gunsmith or the craftsman who did the ivory inlays in 1955 is more than likely dead. So for you to tell me that I have to go hunt down the craftsman who put the ivory inlays on my grandfather's shotgun when my grandfather lived in New Hampshire, it's a little bit of a burden, because I'm going to have to go try to find that documentation, because the burden is upon me now. Now, when I go to transfer this heirloom, the bill says I must provide documentation of where the ivory was acquired, how the firearm was done. The challenge is there's no specificity in the documentation requirement.
Senator Vitek, also what Ed just said about firearms, I've talked to some of the musical people and the piano. They're finding the same, even though they're exempted here, they have the same concern about restoring some of these old instruments. So I do think this is a really important point.
Other questions, Senator Vitek? Okay, that's a valid question. Senator Allen?
I guess I get that this is a challenge. I get it. I think ultimately, though, the problem is that, if you look at the analysis, there was a study done that showed that something between 77 and 90% of all ivory sales that are taking place within the state are probably in violation of California law. And given the enormity of the ecological and biodiversity challenge at play here, and the fact that it's so easy to take new ivory, and the vast majority of the ivory that's being sold is new ivory, and make it look old, spill tea on it, and all this sort of thing. Everything that you've said is true, and I think ultimately our challenge here is to balance these legitimate personal rights concerns and property concerns with the broader with the broader biodiversity concerns of the massacre of these animals and the marketability. And so I mean, that's ultimately why I support this bill, as much as I hope that, and I appreciate the conversations that you've had, and I hope that they'll continue with finding ways to make it work for the folks who are in the situation that you're talking about. But the core problem here is that almost all of the ivory that's being sold, even given our current law, is new ivory coming from illegal poaching that's helping to decimate these populations. So that's why the authors come forward with this bill, and that's why I think it merits support.
Let me have people who are opposed to this line up by microphone. Is it over here? We're using two of them. If there's people here opposing it, just name an affiliation and position of oppose.
Good morning. Tom Pedersen on behalf of California Rifle and Pistol Association. We're opposed to the bill only because of the lack of an exemption or permit process for illegally acquired firearms. Thank you.
Got it.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Bill Gaines on behalf of the California Houndsmen for Conservation and the California Bowman Hunter State Archery Association. We're opposed to the bill.
Opposed to the bill. Thank you for your comments. Is there a motion on the bill? And then I'm going to have the author close. Moved by Senator Jackson. Assemblymember Atkins, you've heard a couple of suggestions. You've heard the mood of the people. Thank you very much for an engaged and prolonged discussion. And if you would close, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. To the last point, it is very complicated how to figure out to do establishing volume by weight, and we do have existing ways to do that already related to antiques. But we do have to take a deeper look at it, and we can. But there is existing federal requirements on these issues too. So I want to keep reminding my colleagues that there is existing federal law. California is strengthening the law. There's some indication that the federal government intends to do the same thing. So we are heading in the direction of New Jersey, New York, states where this has been a huge problem. California is the second largest seller of illegal ivory in the country. And to the point of bounty hunters, the one thing I would say about that, we had an incredible speaker from Hong Kong when we presented this in the Assembly, Sharon Kwok, who said her effort in Hong Kong is to make it for the illegal ivory. We're not talking the antiques and the musical instruments, but to make it unacceptable to even possess something that is endangering animals in this day and time. And so I think we can continue to have the discussion about how to address some of these issues practically, because I think that's the issue. Practically, how do you address issues in people's lives so that they can respect the inheritance and the, of things that are passed on. pledge to continue to work on these issues, and I will, as long as we can follow federal law, that we are not creating a further heavier burden in terms of a system that makes it even harder. We'll look at your question, Senator Allen, but I would just say in closing, I do want to thank Senator Lara, who is a co-author of this bill and wanted to be here today to be part of the discussion. But it's clear to me that ending ivory trade is just as much a humanitarian imperative as it is a wildlife conservation imperative. And we have the power to significantly reduce the demand for ivory, and that's the goal of this bill, and to clarify enforcement issues as it relates to the loophole that we have had in place since 1977. I'm heartened when I look at the studies and the polling that shows across the board, more than 84% of Republicans, 85% of independents, 91% of Democrats, 83% of gun owners think that we are headed in the right direction to try and accomplish something that will reduce the illegal sale of ivory. So I would ask for your support today, and it will continue to be somewhat a work in progress as we consider the issues. But again, ultimately, we want to make sure we close the loophole.
Yes, thank you very much for that close and bringing this bill forward. One of the reasons I'm a co-author on it, my family, without me, went last year on a safari to Kenya, and the overwhelming devastation from poachers coming in from neighboring countries. In California, with 39 million people, we are an incredible market for amazing amount of goods, and to have perhaps be playing a role in this increase of poaching of these animals is amazing. And the stories, the family came back with elephants. You have to go to their native habitat and not just a zoo to really appreciate their amazing stature on the earth. And so there are minor details with federal estates and percentage of this and that and collectibles that hopefully may be worked out in the future by someone else, but we have a crisis on our hands, so I'm proud to be a co-author. Roll call, please. The motion was due pass to appropriations.
Senators Pavley?
Aye.
Pavley, aye. Stone? Allen? Allen, aye. Hertzberg? Hueso? Jackson? Jackson, aye. Monning? Monning, aye. Vidak? Vidak, no. Wolk? Wolk, aye.
You have sufficient votes to pass, but we'll leave it open for other members to add on. You have a second bill, Speaker Atkins. It shouldn't take as long.
Thank you.
Not that we don't welcome your attendance at our committee hearings, but let's allow just a minute for the room to clear of anyone not staying to listen to your conservancy bill. I was going to share with the members when my family was in Africa, one of their elephant stories. A pride of lions was attacking a water buffalo and just clawing it to death. A herd of elephants came in, circled the buffalo to protect it, and provide. I mean, it just, they're amazing. Yeah, they are. Feelings and yeah, the intelligence. The kids and Andy came back, I had no idea their level of. But the Kenya and countries like that, whose whole economy relies on the tourist trade, this is, the other side of the story, right? Yes. Yeah.
So they want to take the committee amendment now, but.
while we're waiting for people to still clear out of the halls, let's open the roll for the consent calendar. Members missing on the consent calendar, open the roll, please.
Senators Hertzberg, Jackson, Jackson, aye. Monning, Monning, aye.
Okay.
We just need Hertzberg for later.
We'll leave it open for Senator Hertzberg. Assemblymember Atkins, somehow you don't have as many of supporters on this measure.
If we were in San Diego, a room full.
That's true. Okay, there's some people coming in now. Probably for some of the other items on the agenda.